Hey friends, tonight we're drifting back into the quieter corners of the past where life moved slowly and some jobs were, well, let's just say they were definitely not in the career brochures. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you actually enjoy this kind of sleepy historical storytelling. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see the little constellation of viewers around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe get cozy with a blanket, or let the fan hum softly in the background, and let's slip gently into tonight's tale together. Our journey takes us into the strangest jobs in ancient history, the kinds of roles you almost can't believe were real. We'll meet the Gong Farmers, those brave souls who spent their nights emptying cesspits under the cloak of darkness. We'll wander past whipping boys, human scapegoats for royal tantrums, and other forgotten figures who made the world work in ways most history books quietly skip over. No rush, no drama. Just the steady rhythm of old stories, half whispered through time. Let's begin. The Gong Farmers' day began at dusk, when respectable citizens retreated to their homes. Armed with simple tools and sturdy carts, these workers descended into the underground chambers where human waste accumulated. The work was methodical, requiring patience and endurance. They would carefully extract the contents of these pits, load their carts, and transport the waste to designated areas outside the city walls. The process was slow, deliberate, and absolutely necessary for the health of the community. These workers developed their own customs and traditions over the centuries. They often worked in small groups, sharing the burden of their labor, and forming tight-knit communities bound by their shared profession. The Gong farmers knew every street, every hidden corner, every household routine in their assigned districts. They moved through the darkness like gentle shadows, their presence both essential and invisible to the sleeping world above. The compensation for such work varied across different regions and time periods. In some areas, Gong farmers received payment in coin, while in others they were granted specific privileges or exemptions from certain taxes. The waste they collected was not merely discarded, but often sold to farmers who recognized its value as fertilizer for their crops. This created a curious economy where human waste became a commodity, carefully managed and distributed according to the needs of agricultural communities. During the long winter months, the work of the Gong farmer became even more challenging. The waste would freeze solid in the pits, requiring additional time and effort to extract. The farmers developed specialized techniques for dealing with these seasonal complications, using heated tools and patience to slowly work through the frozen material. Their dedication to their craft ensured that even in the harshest conditions, the essential work continued without interruption. The tools of the Gong farmer were simple but effective. Long-handled shovels, sturdy buckets, and reinforced carts were the primary instruments of their trade. These tools were carefully maintained and often passed down through generations of workers. The craft required not only physical strength, but also a deep understanding of the best techniques for managing different types of waste and working efficiently in confined spaces. The whipping boy was typically chosen from among the children of lesser nobility or wealthy merchants. These boys were selected not only for their social status, but also for their character and intelligence. They were educated alongside the young nobles, sharing the same lessons, the same tutors, and the same daily routines. The relationship between the whipping boy and the noble child often developed into a genuine friendship, bound by shared experiences and mutual understanding. When the noble child failed to complete assignments or disrupted lessons, the whipping boy would receive the physical punishment on their behalf. This system was designed to create a sense of responsibility in the noble child, who would presumably feel guilt and shame at seeing their companions suffer for their own misdeeds. The punishment was administered with ceremony and solemnity, emphasizing the gravity of the offense and the importance of proper behavior. The daily life of a whipping boy was filled with contradiction. On one hand, they enjoyed access to the finest education available, learning languages, mathematics, history, and the arts alongside their noble companions. They lived in comfortable quarters, ate quality food, and wore fine clothing. Yet they also bore the constant burden of potential punishment for actions that were not their own. The psychological impact of this role was complex and varied from individual to individual. Some whipping boys developed a strong sense of duty and loyalty to their noble companions, viewing their role as an honor and a service to the crown. Others struggled with the inherent unfairness of their position, though they rarely had the opportunity to voice such concerns. The relationship between the whipping boy and their noble charge often evolved into a lifelong bond, with the whipping boy sometimes continuing to serve as an advisor or companion into adulthood. The education received by whipping boys was comprehensive and valuable. They studied the same subjects as their noble companions, often excelling in their studies due to their unique position and the necessity of proving their worth. Many whipping boys went on to achieve significant positions in government, the church, or other influential institutions, using the education and connections they had gained through their unusual childhood role. In ancient Rome, the profession of the Vomitorium Attendant represented another curious occupation born from the excesses of the wealthy elite. These individuals were responsible for assisting guests at elaborate banquets who had overindulged in food and wine. The vomitorium, contrary to popular belief, was not a room designed for the purpose of vomiting, but rather a term that originally referred to the passages in amphitheaters through which crowds would exit. However, in the context of private homes and banquet halls, certain areas were designated for guests who needed to relieve themselves of excess consumption. The vomitorium attendants' duties were varied and required both discretion and efficiency. They would provide assistance to guests who had consumed too much, offering clean linens, water for washing, and herbal remedies to ease discomfort. These attendants were trained in basic medical knowledge, understanding which herbs and preparations could help settle an upset stomach or clear a foggy head. Their presence at banquets was both practical and symbolic, representing the host's commitment to the comfort and well-being of their guests. These attendants developed a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and the effects of various foods and wines. They could often predict which guests might require assistance based on their consumption patterns and behavior throughout the evening. This knowledge allowed them to position themselves strategically and prepare the necessary supplies in advance, ensuring that their services were available when needed, without drawing unwanted attention to the guest's condition. The social position of the Vomitorium Attendant was complex, existing in the liminal space between servant and medical professional. They were trusted with intimate knowledge of their employer's guests and were expected to maintain absolute discretion about what they witnessed. This trust often elevated their status within the household, and experienced attendants were highly valued for their skill and reliability. In ancient Egypt, the profession of the sacred animal caretaker represented a unique intersection of religious duty and practical animal husbandry. These individuals were responsible for the care and maintenance of animals that were considered sacred to various deities. The most famous of these were the cats sacred to the goddess Bastet, but the role extended to many other animals, including ibises, crocodiles, and bulls. The sacred animal caretaker's day began before dawn with the feeding and grooming of their charges. Each animal had specific dietary requirements and care protocols that had been established by religious authorities and passed down through generations of caretakers. The work required not only practical knowledge of animal care, but also a deep understanding of religious rituals and ceremonial requirements. These caretakers developed intimate relationships with the animals in their care, learning to recognize individual personalities and preferences. They understood the subtle signs of illness or distress and were skilled in the preparation of various remedies and treatments. The health and well-being of the sacred animals was considered a reflection of the favor of the gods, making the caretaker's role both spiritually and practically significant. The training for this profession was extensive and began in childhood. Young caretakers would apprentice under experienced practitioners, learning not only the practical aspects of animal care, but also the religious significance of their work. They studied the myths and stories associated with each type of animal, understanding their role in the larger cosmology of Egyptian religion. The daily routines of the sacred animal caretakers were carefully structured and followed ancient patterns. Morning feedings were accompanied by specific prayers and rituals. The animals were groomed and their living spaces cleaned according to precise protocols. Afternoon activities might include exercise or training, depending on the type of animal. Evening routines concluded with final feedings and prayers, ensuring that the animals were comfortable and secure for the night. In medieval Europe, the profession of the sin eater emerged from the intersection of religious belief and social necessity. These individuals performed a unique ritual service at funerals, symbolically taking on the sins of the deceased by consuming a meal in their presence. The practice was based on the belief that the sins of the dead could be transferred to the living through this ceremonial consumption, allowing the deceased to enter the afterlife unburdened by their earthly transgressions. The sin eater's role was both feared and respected within their communities. They were called upon during times of death and grief, arriving at the funeral with solemnity and purpose.
The ritual itself was simple but profound. A meal, typically consisting of bread and beer, would be placed on the chest of the deceased. The sin-eater would then consume this meal while reciting specific prayers or incantations, symbolically absorbing the sins of the dead person. The social position of the sin-eater was complex and often contradictory. While their service was considered essential for the spiritual well-being of the deceased and their family, the sin-eaters themselves were often viewed with suspicion and fear. The belief that they carried the accumulated sins of many dead people made them figures to be both respected and avoided. This paradox often led to a life of isolation and social marginalization. The compensation for sin eating varied significantly across different regions and time periods. In some areas, sin eaters received payment in coin, while in others they were given goods or services. The payment was often minimal, reflecting the lower social status of those who typically performed this role. However, the service was considered so essential that communities would ensure that sin eaters were maintained even if they were not prosperous.
The training and preparation for becoming a sin eater was largely informal, passed down through families or learned through apprenticeship. The knowledge required included not only the specific rituals and prayers, but also an understanding of the beliefs and customs of the community. Sin eaters needed to be able to perform their duties with dignity and solemnity, despite the fear and suspicion they often encountered. In ancient China, the profession of the imperial food taster represented a role that combined privilege with constant danger. These individuals were responsible for testing all food and drink that would be consumed by the emperor and his immediate family. The position required not only a refined palate, but also the courage to face potential death with each meal, as poisoning was a constant threat in the imperial court. The daily routine of an imperial food taster was structured around the meal schedules of the royal family. Each dish prepared in the imperial kitchens would be sampled by the taster before being served. This process required careful timing and coordination, as the food needed to remain fresh and properly heated, while still allowing sufficient time for any potential poison to take effect in the taster's system. The training for this position was extensive and began with the development of an exceptionally sensitive palate. Potential tasters would study the flavors and textures of hundreds of different ingredients, learning to detect even subtle changes that might indicate the presence of foreign substances. They also studied the effects of various known poisons, understanding the symptoms and timeline of different toxic substances. The imperial food taster lived with the constant awareness that each meal might be their last. This reality created a unique psychological profile among those who chose this profession. Many developed a philosophical acceptance of their fate, viewing their role as a sacred duty to protect the emperor and maintain the stability of the realm. Others struggled with the constant stress and uncertainty, though they rarely had the option to abandon their position once appointed. The social status of the imperial food taster was elevated due to their proximity to the emperor and their crucial role in imperial security. They were well compensated for their dangerous work and often received additional privileges and honors. Their families were also provided for, recognizing the sacrifice that the taster made in service to the crown. In ancient Greece, the profession of the oracle interpreter
represented a unique blend of religious authority and practical communication. These individuals served as intermediaries between the often cryptic pronouncements of the oracles and the common people who sought divine guidance. The most famous of these interpreters worked at sites like Delphi, where the Pythia would deliver prophecies in a state of divine inspiration that often required clarification and explanation. The oracle interpreter's role required extensive knowledge of religious traditions, mythology, and the specific practices of their particular oracle site. They needed to understand the symbolic language often used in prophetic pronouncements and be able to translate these messages into practical advice for the pilgrims who had traveled great distances to seek guidance. This work required not only religious knowledge, but also psychological insight and communication skills. The daily routine of an oracle interpreter was closely tied to the schedule of the oracle they served. They would prepare for sessions by studying the questions that pilgrims had brought, understanding the context and background that might inform the oracle's response. During the actual consultation, they would listen carefully to the oracle's words, noting not only the specific language used, but also the tone, gestures, and other nonverbal elements that might carry meaning. The interpretation process was both art and science, requiring the interpreter to balance faithful representation of the oracle's words with practical application to the pilgrim's situation. They had to be sensitive to the emotional state of those seeking guidance, while maintaining their authority as religious intermediaries. The responsibility was enormous, as their interpretations could influence major life decisions, political actions, and even military campaigns. The training for this profession was extensive and typically began in childhood. Young interpreters would apprentice under experienced practitioners, learning not only the technical aspects of interpretation, but also the spiritual and philosophical foundations of their work. They studied the history of their oracle site, the patterns of previous prophecies, and the cultural context that shaped the questions brought by pilgrims. These strange occupations of ancient history remind us that human societies have always required specialized roles to function effectively. Each of these professions emerged from specific needs and circumstances, representing practical solutions to the challenges of their time. The Gong Farmer ensured public health through sanitation. The whipping boy maintained educational discipline. The Vomitorium Attendant provided comfort and care. The sacred animal caretaker served religious devotion. The sin eater offered spiritual solace. The imperial food taster of China revealed the constant political tensions within royal courts. The people who performed these roles were ordinary individuals who adapted to extraordinary circumstances. They developed specialized skills, formed professional communities, and created traditions that were passed down through generations. Their work was often unglamorous, sometimes dangerous, and frequently misunderstood by those outside their profession. Yet they persevered, understanding that their contribution was essential to the functioning of their society. These ancient professions also revealed the complex social hierarchies and belief systems of their respective cultures. The existence of whipping boys reflects the rigid class structures of medieval Europe, while the sacred animal caretakers of Egypt demonstrate the integration of religious belief with practical animal husbandry. The sin eaters of medieval communities show how spiritual concerns shaped social practices. and the imperial food tasters of China reveal the constant political tensions within royal courts. As we reflect on these ancient occupations, we gain insight into the ingenuity and adaptability of human societies. People have always found ways to address their collective needs, creating roles and institutions that might seem strange to modern eyes, but were perfectly logical within their historical context. These professions remind us that what we consider normal and natural is often the product of specific historical circumstances and cultural values. The legacy of these ancient occupations can still be seen in modern society, though often in transformed and updated forms. The work of the Gong Farmer evolved into modern sanitation systems and waste management professionals. The educational discipline once provided by whipping boys has been replaced by more humane approaches to child development and learning. The medical knowledge of vomitorium attendants contributed to our understanding of digestive health and the treatment of overconsumption. Tonight, as we prepare for rest, we can appreciate the quiet dedication of these forgotten workers who labored in the shadows of history. Their stories remind us that every society depends on individuals willing to perform necessary but often unrecognized work. They faced their daily challenges with patience and persistence, contributing to the well-being of their communities in ways that were essential but rarely celebrated. In the gentle darkness of sleep, let us remember these ancient workers who rose each day to fulfill their duties, no matter how strange or challenging they might have been. Their commitment to their craft and their communities created the foundation upon which civilizations were built. Their stories, though unusual, are part of the larger human story of adaptation, service, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people performing extraordinary tasks. Rest now, knowing that the strange occupations of ancient history were filled not with exotic mysteries, but with the familiar rhythms of daily work, human dedication, and the eternal effort to build and maintain the communities that shelter us all. In their service, we find the timeless truth that every role, no matter how peculiar it might seem, contributes to the greater tapestry of human experience and the ongoing story of civilization itself.